Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and I'm going to do the Western Canon Tag. This is my second attempt at the tag because my first version was way too long. This tag was created by Aaron Facer. The description is, in this tag, you can choose 20 books to represent your reading of Western literature. You can include books from any period or genre. You can define Western literature as you will. Also, please feel free to choose a different number of books if you feel like 20 is too little or too few. I'm going to stick with 20. There are 3 prompts. 1. If you could choose 20 books to represent your reading of Western literature, how would you choose them? What would you look for? I thought of doing this in a very narrow way, of like choosing the top 20 American novels of the 20th century for my Western canon. But I've decided to look at a much broader scope and include as much variety as I possibly can. After choosing your 20 books, what blind spots have you noticed? Plenty. The time period that I'm looking on is very long, and I only have 20 slots. So astute readers will notice big gaps. Even some favorite authors of mine that do not make this list, because I feel like there are other books more representative of an all-encompassing Western canon than just my personal favorites. 3. What 20 books would you choose to represent your reading of the Western literature? I'm going to start off with the roots, and that is the Epic of Gilgamesh, the first written work of literature. It is the story of Gilgamesh and Enkidu. It is a story of how humans deal with mortality. And it is absolutely essential. There are many different translations. I really cannot recommend one translation over the other. You'll just have to pick up and read some lines and see what works for you. Of course, Homer has to be on this list. There is Team Iliad and there is Team Odyssey. Both are excellent choices. I am choosing to be on Team Odyssey and focus on the story of Odysseus and his return home to Ithaca. It is an experience unlike a lot of you'll ever encounter elsewhere. And it is so early and is just a stunning example of what you can do with literature. Plato, the collected dialogues. Now, I am not going to suggest that you have to read the entire dialogues of Plato. I am going to suggest reading the first 3. They're known as the last days of Socrates. Socrates, of course, was Plato's teacher and highly influential. And one of the things you have to warn about Plato is some of his philosophy, his ideas really don't hold up to the modern world. In the Phaedo, he discusses the human soul, and I just think he misses the mark. But where he hits is in his discussion of philosophy and how people should learn to love philosophy and love knowledge. And that's where he becomes important. Just to read him and get that love of knowledge. After the other 3 dialogues, you can read some others. The Republic is probably his most famous dialogue, but it's long, but it's good. We then come to sort of the beginnings of English literature. I'm excluding Beowulf because that's really more Germanic literature. I mean, you cannot read Beowulf in the original. Chaucer you can read in his original Middle English. He is a fabulous storyteller. Again, you probably don't have to read all of the Canterbury Tales to get a good grasp on what it's like to read Chaucer. You're going to want to read the prologue. You're going to read the Knight's Tale and the Miller's Tale. Those are my favorites. And you should probably dip into some of the other ones. And do try to read the original Middle English. It's a bit of work in the beginning, but you'll be rewarded in the end by able to read how people wrote in the 1300s. Next on the list is no big surprise. That is William Shakespeare. Probably the most important author in the English language. I'm going to choose Hamlet as my representative for a play to read, although my personal favorite is Macbeth, because I'm rather fond of Lady Macbeth. Also, when reading Shakespeare, I'm going to suggest not to get too obsessed with the words you don't understand. Just read the lines and go with the flow. It'd be like you're sitting in the theater and the actors are on the stage. They're saying their lines and they're not going to stop in the middle of their line and give a definition of Bear Botkin. Just read him. You will get the gist and you will get the flow. The most important author of the English language. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. It is perhaps one of the earliest horror novels, one of the earliest science fiction novels. It is a story of a man playing God. And this is from a woman who probably did not believe in God as we would know it today. Her husband was a known atheist who wrote The Necessities of Atheism. And it is, as I said, it is a story that is chilling and fabulous, and I am in utter awe that a woman so young could write a novel so great. Now I'm coming up to some samples of novels that I do not have a physical copy to show you. And that first one would be Moby-Dick by Herman Melville. It is the story of Ishmael going to sea and the story of Captain Ahab and his obsession with finding the white whale who bit off his leg. And there is something about this novel that is unlike any other novel that has been written. It is two stories, the whaling story and sort of a scientific discussion on whales and whaling of that time. But those two stories are actually intertwined very closely. And you would be the poorer reader if you just stuck to the whaling story. Then there is another one I do not have, and that would be Bleak House by Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens is arguably the most important English or British novelist of the 19th century. I'm choosing Bleak House because not only was it the one I most recently read, it's a good story, and you will get to learn about the lawsuit of Jaundice and Jaundice and the fabulous wrap-up to that lawsuit. Now, other people will suggest Great Expectations or David Copperfield as the best Dickens novel to read, and I'm not going to say they're wrong. Of the three, any one is a good choice, but Dickens is still a very important author to have read. After that, I'm coming with one of the most important works of American poetry, Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, especially the poem Song of Myself. This is a story, a poem that explores what it means to be human, to loaf and invite your soul, or to release your barbaric yelp over the rooftops of the world. And what else do we booktubers do when we make videos but release barbaric yelps across the internet? Great poetry that everyone should read. Do you have to read the whole volume of Leaves of Grass? Probably not. As I said, Song of Myself, some other sample poems, and you're pretty good. Then there comes the beginning of the Russian novel. This is Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Some people are going to be on team Brothers Karamazov, but for this purposes, I'm going to say Crime and Punishment. So you're introduced to Raskolnikov, the student who thinks he is above all humanity and can murder with impunity. And you also get introduced to the white heat of Fyodor Dostoevsky. He writes in a style that, as I said, his brain is on fire. He is profound and deep, but he can be clumsy in places. Some translators clean up Dostoevsky's clumsiness. There is a scene early on in this novel where you're in Raskolnikov's garret, and the table is described as round and oval. And a lot of people say, well, that's just sloppy. But that sloppiness carries over from the original Russian, because Dostoevsky's brain was on fire, and he just could not control himself and smooth out his prose. But his ideas, man, it's just an experience. And I kind of wanted to exclude this in some ways because I already have a Russian novel on here, but there's no way I can get around War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This is a novel, but it's also not a novel. This is a world-encompassing view of Leo Tolstoy and his views of history about Napoleon invading Russia. You will have a huge cast of characters, and you will get lost, and you will not know who these characters are until you go back to the glossary and look them up again. But in time, you will learn to love these characters and feel their losses. A total experience. Another 19th century British novelist, one I have to include because he is just different from Dickens. He is much more bleak. He is fatalistic. His characters have no control in their life. They are pawns of a greater force. What that greater force is, Hardy really doesn't say, other than they have no controls of their lives. And this is the story of Jude Fawley, who wants to do better in his life, but is never going to make it. This one is an incredibly bleak book. It's possible to swap out Tessa d'Urberville's or Far from the Maddening Crowds and still get that experience of Thomas Hardy. But everyone should experience Thomas Hardy. Next, I wanted to talk about the immigrant experience, especially in the United States, because immigration has always been an issue in the United States. And I'm choosing to pick the story of Jewish immigrants to New York City during the 30s, and just what it's like to feel not wanted in a city where you live. And this is a story that has a lot of stream of consciousness, and I think anyone would do themselves a good service to pick up this book, because you will be transported back to New York City in the 30s. I also want to include detective fiction on this list. A lot of people do not think highly of detective fiction, but it is an important part of writing, especially in the United States. It is perhaps one of the most popular forms of writing. There is, a lot of substandard writing, cheap books, but a lot of them are really good. And for the representative of the detective novel, I'm going to pick The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler. This is 1938-39, Los Angeles. And he really sort of creates that image of the tough guy Seamus getting on the case. And to truly understand American literature, you need to understand detective stories. So I'm going to say The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler. After that, another book I do not have, I want to include the African American Experience in the United States, and that will be Native Son by Richard Wright. It is the story of a poor African American hired to be the chauffeur for a rich white family. They're very welcoming to him, and they want him. They want to rise up, what they say, the Negro of the times, and make them more successful. But it's also the story of a murder, and that claustrophobic feeling that Bigger Thomas, who is the African American who murders a young girl, feels as society is closing in on him, getting ready to capture him for his crimes. Part of this also is the people who want to help him is the Communist Party, and Richard Wright believed in the Communist Party in the 30s. Later on in life, he disavowed it because he learned more about what was going on in the Soviet Union. So a companion piece to Native Son is his later novel, The Outsider. It's not as good as Native Son. Native Son is absolutely an essential piece of American literature. After that, I want to introduce philosophical novels. These are novels that explore ideas and introduce the world of thought into fiction, and that is going to be Albert Camus' The Stranger. And this is the story of a man who commits a murder on a beach, but he's convicted. But the real reason he's convicted is he does not fit into society because he did not cry at his mother's funeral. This is perhaps my favorite novel of all time. Science fiction is another important part of modern writing. And I wanted to include a representative science fiction. I could have picked Dune by Frank Herbert, but I'm going to go with The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. It is a stunning and stellar example of what an author can do with the genre of science fiction. It has good characters, it has a good story, and it has meaning behind the story. And in a way, it's very relevant to some of our ideas today. Even though this novel was written in 1969, it discusses issues of gender in a very modern way. Or maybe we're looking back to her to see how we should visit or view gender. Next is a novel I sometimes question putting on this list, but I wanted to talk about postmodernism and postmodern novels. So I'm going to pick Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon. This is going to be a very difficult novel for many people to get through. I imagine it is a novel that is frequently DNF'd, but it's worthwhile. It shows what you can do with a novel. in ways that most people decide not to go for. It is a story of World War II, of an American serviceman in Europe who, to be a little impolite, his erections can determine where the German bombs are going to fall. That's a little salacious tidbit to get people interested. If it's really difficult, go for the audiobook version narrated by, I believe, Grover Gardner, which is just a magnificent reading of this book. I also want to discuss a little bit of post-colonialism in literature from Britain, and for that I've picked Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. This won the Booker Prize. It later won the Booker of Bookers, saying it was one of the best Booker Prizes. It is the story of the children born at midnight on the eve when Britain relinquished rule of India, and India and Pakistan divided into two different nations. And the children born at the stroke of midnight all have supernatural powers. And the narrator of this book, Salim, has uncanny sense of smell. And it utterly fascinated me when I read this. And I learned a lot about India, which is a good thing for an American who doesn't know much about all the other countries in the world. Lastly is a book that I only have an ebook and audio, and that is Beloved by Toni Morrison. It is the story of the horrors of American slavery. It is a ghost story, and it is a beautifully written book. It is also a book that gets frequently banned. And one of the main reasons I wanted to include this is include a book on this list that people want to ban because the ideas are ideas people want to suppress, and ideas should never be suppressed. So that is the end of my Western Canon Tag. I'm about 15 minutes shorter than my first version, which is good. I'm going to tag some people. I'm going to tag a lot of people. Don't feel that you have to do this if you don't want to. I've tagged a lot of people who may feel their reading choices do not fit in the Western canon. And those are the people I won't call out by name, but those are the ones that I think should be really tempted to do this tag, because if you feel passionate about reading and you don't think your reading is representative in the Western canon, give your books a shout out so we can all learn about them. So the people I'm going to tag are Anna Novella, Big Hard Books and Classics, Book Time with Ryan, Books of Blood, Criminale, Jeremy Fee, Michael K. Vaughan, Michael Romeo Talks Books, Misreads a Lot, My Home is My Library, Pax Panic, Reading This Life, and Run Right Reads. So there is my list. Thank you for watching, and keep on reading.